So much for being here tonight. I'm Dave Stewart, Athletic Director of the club. I really appreciate all you coaches taking the time to come to our coach education session, especially tonight because John and Sullivan's presentations are awesome. John is the founder of the Way of Champions,
Change the Game
Project, and the Way of Champions conference, which we go to every year with a group of coaches from the club. And I think that his work and his work with Jerry Lynch, who he partners with, has had a really great impact on what we do and really aligns with our mission to create champions on and off the mountain. He's got a background as a soccer player at the collegiate level, at the professional level as a coach, and then ran a soccer club in Bend, Oregon, and then transitioned into really trying to change the game of youth sports, and has been doing that for the last 13, 14 years, really traveling the world, working with clubs, national governing bodies like USB Snowboard, cycling, swimming, to spread this message about best practices in youth sports. So very much aligns with what we do. He just was in United Arab Emirates for 2 weeks working with some schools there, and is a really sought after speaker internationally. Providing this content. So he's been here before working with our club. A lot of our coaches have been to his conference, and we've had him present to the club over the years, and very much has had an impact on what we do, delivering our message onto the snow. So we're very happy to have John O'Sullivan here speaking to us. Welcome.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you all for carving out some time this evening to be here. Just show of hands, who's new to the club this year? Okay, just a couple. And those who are new, are you new to coaching as well? Is this your first time coaching or coached before? New to coaching? Awesome. Awesome. This is great. So everything we're going to kind of talk about here tonight is very little to do with all of you know way more about ski racing, and especially if you've seen me Nordic ski, you know way more about that than me, and snowboarding and all that sort of stuff. I am an avid, winter sports guy though. I've lived in Bend for 17 years. I lived in Vail for 5 years. I lived in Vermont for 4. I coached soccer at University of Vermont, and so I've been chasing snow for many years, but never a ski racer or a competitive snowboarder or anything like that. But someone who loves the snow, someone who, loves the outdoors. I have a 16 and a 17-year-old, a junior and senior in high school. My 17-year-old daughter, this year, she decided most of her club soccer teammates aged out, went to college last year. So she's like, Dad, I'm not going to play my senior year because I want to go teach skiing. So she just got a job as a ski instructor at Mount Bachelor, which I thought was pretty cool. I've been involved in sport for ages. Again, coaching the youth level to the collegiate level, WPSL head coach, and everything in between. What I want to do tonight, as Dave was talking about, I do this advocacy work, and then Jerry Lynch and I also have this podcast together called The Way of Champions, where we're now, I think this week will be 346 straight weeks we've managed to release a podcast, which is definitely the longest I've ever stuck to anything in my life. And it's been great. Like the people that we've had on and got to interview, those who were at the conference this summer saw Steve Kerr and Phil Jackson from basketball, tons of people in lacrosse and field hockey and soccer and athletes at the highest level. It's been a great journey. And so what Jerry and I always say is we try to be the flute where we take all this wisdom from other people and we distill it down and then try to make it sound pretty coming out. And but what I'd love with this group is for this hour to be really interactive, ask questions. I have things I'd like to talk about, but I think I can get most of what I'd like to talk about out through more of a conversational thing as well, okay? I have no place to go, so we can go questions afterwards and stuff like that as well, okay? Let's start with this. What are some of your biggest challenges right now as a coach? Your biggest challenges that you face? What makes it hard to do? You can say it. We're all thinking the same thing. What do you think? or some of the things?
I think one that we've encountered is resistant learners.
Okay, excellent. Resistant learners, yeah, yeah. Or I might even say it, so let's start with that. Finish this sentence. Kids these days are resistant learners. What else? Pain in the ass sometimes, okay?
Distracted.
Distracted, yeah, by so many other things they can do.
Or kids getting hurt. Kids getting hurt.
Kids get hurt a lot more.
Like like that's always like a fun balance, especially with like tricks and stuff. Kids going for it, and like at one point you have to go for it, but you know, doesn't always work.
The teenage brain is an amazing thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Such wisdom in some areas and such lack thereof in others. What else? Kids these days.
The expectations they have sometimes are a little bit, maybe they get ahead of themselves a little bit, and the pathway that they need to follow to meet those expectations which they have in themselves sometimes is a bit naive or abbreviated in their minds. They want to go from A to Z without going through B, C, D, and so forth.
Yeah, yeah.
And not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that's something that's
Well,
tough to manage.
I think they live in a different world than us, right? A lot of, I'm 52, so you're not all as old as me, but like, right, where you didn't have everyone at the best in the world, you didn't see everyone's end product, right? You sort of had your little world and you worked your way through. I mean, and it's one of the wonderful things about Steamboat, why there's so many Olympians, because you can go to the same school as someone else who's been through it, and so actually your kids are far more connected to the process than many others are. But yeah, everyone, you know, like I said, like Dave said, I just got back from the Middle East, and every kid thinks that they're going to be Messi or Ronaldo, and I watch them play, I'm like, oh my God, right? Like there was a mom who was telling me how her son was supposed to, like, how was he going to make it as a professional soccer player at Man City? And I'm just like, first of all, don't live in the UAE, right? Because you're not going to make it living here. I said, you need to move. But then afterwards, the AD comes up, he goes, you know, that kid's on my middle school soccer team, and he doesn't even start. And I'm like, oh my. Right? So, yeah, so this disconnect from the process and sort of the love of the grind and getting better. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of feel like herding cats. You've got like so many independent, like-minded bodies, and sometimes they look like focus, and some days
Yeah.
every direction.
Yeah, and so there's, you know, what we do know is that obviously COVID, we don't know what the full thing is, but it had a tremendous effect on children. And especially children right now age like currently like 9 to 13 or 14, right? So these were the kids who, right, when you're really young, you're sort of really connected to your family, right? And when you're in high school, you're already sort of independent. But those kids sort of that were like 9, 10 years old during COVID who were just starting to pull away and then got shoved away from that. Like, it's really interesting. The teachers will tell you that, you know, just the behavior thing. And I just started last year coaching. I have 50, like, 7, 8, 9-year-olds in a little soccer program. And I hadn't coached that age since my kids were that age. And these kids are way different. Like, the fact we were saying this morning, like, you know, it's like as soon, like, we call them in, and as soon as the coach starts talking, that seems like to be the cue for everyone else to have their own conversation. And I don't remember it being that way. The way they sort of treat each other, like just some of the disrespectful issues seem to be, so it's challenging, right? It's a challenging environment with kids. I have some interesting statistics here. When we think about kids these days, first of all, like, even that picture is totally outdated at this point, right? But right, so Gen Z, right? We shouldn't judge them based on who we were at their age, right? They've grown up with the tech and internet. Remember when my daughter was like, Dad, how old were, because we didn't give our kids cell phones, so they were 14. And my daughter's like, well, Dad, how old were you when you had your first cell phone? I was like, 32. Right? Right? So 5+ hours a day on screens. And now that we're using screens in schools more instead of books, it's probably more. This is a really interesting one. 79% exhibit emotional distress when kept from their electronic devices, right? So when we think about this, when we're running a practice, when we're running an activity, and 4 out of 5 kids are stressed because they don't know what's happening on Snapchat, right, or Instagram, or whatever. I think fear is a huge part of their existence, and this thing of like, I'm not meeting my parents' standards. There's a brand new book out by this woman, Jennifer Wallace, and I'm about to interview her here for our podcast in November. And it's called Never Enough, and it's just like the pressure on kids to, right? Everyone wants to go to one of 30 colleges, you know, high top level schools and excel at sports and all this sort of stuff, and there's like a lot of fear for children as well. And then I like this one, 52% cite honesty is the most important quality of leadership, right? And yet sometimes I feel as a coach, when I'm honest with someone, that's when they crumble, right? And so I think one of the most important things that we understand as a coach is how do we build a relationship that can bear the burden of truth, right? So coaching is not a X's and O's business, it's a relationship business. And if I have one big takeaway from all these Hall of Famers and NCAA and world champion coaches, it's that. We ask people like, what's your one regret? If you could do some of your coaching over again, what would you add in? And the number one answer by far is more individual meetings, more one-on-one conversations. That's the key to coaching. That's the key to reaching out and connecting with people. Okay? Any questions or thoughts on that? So this is who's in front of us. All right? And then we know what they need technically and tactically. How do we figure out, you know, what they need psychosocially as well? Yeah?
What are the other qualities that are like right below the most important qualities in the leader?
Under honesty?
Yeah.
You know what? I don't actually know that answer offhand. Thanks for making me look back. But I mean, what do you think? That's actually interesting, really interesting question. What do you think that kids also want?
I would think probably the ability to have fun and having some emotional intelligence as a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a part of
Maybe, I mean, part of relationships
Yeah.
for sure. But I think that it's a super important question. You know, what do they want from coaches is a big thing. And so that's actually, it's a great segue into, and I do have some research up on what they want, and I'll show you that in a second. But let's just start with this. So I gave you all 5 sticky notes. Here's what I want you to do. Write down the 5 qualities of the best coach you ever had, right? So one per sticky note, the 5 qualities, and it could be something like they were knowledgeable, or they made it fun, or they were honest, or they cared, or whatever it is. The 5 qualities, 1 per sticky note. Do you need sticky notes in the back, or you got? Okay, you need a pen. Yeah. I think Dave's grabbing some more. It's not working. Dave, you got a couple more? I think there was one there, one up here, or he said his is broken.
And
Thank you.
Can't take her anywhere.
No.
You can't sit him anywhere.
Yeah, he was like, when I was like, man,
maybe at UVM, I think you still lived in Burlington. Yeah, you were pursuing professional road cycling. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, pretty good gig. Yeah.
When you're done with your 5, here's what I'd like you to do. We're gonna stick them up on the wall. And what we're gonna do is, any sticky note that has to do with your coach's knowledge of X's and O's, knowledge of the sport, we'll just go stick it on that wall there. And then any sticky note that has to do with your coach's ability to connect. So this would be, like you said, ma'am, like the emotional intelligence piece. Just stick them over there on the, by the windows there, okay? So this is connection over here, and that's X's and O's, knowledge of the sport over there. And if you're struggling because you're like, I don't think I ever had a good coach, then you're the best teacher or something like that.
John, where would you put that one?
Competitive? I don't know, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Like, of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's it.
Yeah, if you need to put them on the windows, they stick there, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if they're gonna last on the walls.
It's a miracle it's breaking in the wall.
Yeah. Relational. Relational.
I'm good, how are you? Good. Can't sit you next to Sam. I can't sit you next to Sam.
All right, so as we're all sort of finishing up here,
I don't know which side. Exactly.
do we notice like a little pattern emerging before they start falling off the wall? Right? That when we talk about who are your best coaches, you know, and I've done this all over the world with every sport from rugby to skiing to swimming to soccer, American football. It's always the same. There's always way more on this wall. And what's really interesting is usually the higher level of the coaches, like the higher level of their sport participation, the more it tends towards that wall, right? And so this isn't to say in any way, shape, or form that knowledge of the sport doesn't matter, because of course it matters. What it says is it's just not sufficient, right? Is that being a great coach, that's what gets you in the door, right? But this is what makes you a coach. That makes you a trainer, this makes you a coach, right? Show of hands, did anyone not put any on that wall? Yeah, so there's always a couple. Why didn't you put any over there?
I've been thinking about that for a few minutes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. You know, when I look back on all of it, I feel like I gravitated to the sport because maybe it was a little bit more natural for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the technical side wasn't, you know, maybe as important or memorable.
Yeah.
And I remember maybe more of the time spent than I do some of the accomplishments.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Like it happens a lot, right? A lot of people are just like, that's not what I remember, right? 10 years, 20 years ago. Who else didn't put any on that wall and wants to comment? Yeah, and then I'll get you back.
I just remember as a junior athlete that I remember the trips, the training, the experiences, the work, the rewards. And the rewards weren't the scores on the scoreboard, the victories. It was just the experiences, and that's what I remember. You know, I'm 55, so a long time ago. And I remember maybe 1 or 2 games that were desperately emotional, and I remember. But 99.9% of my experiences and what I recall from my youth career, my youth experience as an athlete, was just that training, the interactions, and the connections with other people, both the coaches and my teammates.
Yeah, and yeah, that's the thing, right? Those are the things that stick for sure.
Yeah, he didn't know a lot about the sport, but he didn't need to. He was a parent, or he was a player's dad, and then he was good at building a competitive team, and knowing that the players already knew enough about the sport, he just had to make us believe in ourselves.
Right. My high school soccer coach growing up on Long Island was a New York City firefighter, knew nothing about soccer, couldn't kick a ball, right? I think by the time he retired, he won 450 games, right? He had lots of good players, and he knew how to put them on the field, and he knew his limitations, right? He wasn't afraid to surround himself with good people, right, who knew more than him. He didn't have an ego about it. But yeah, it's it. I've done this, again, when I do this, I ask people, I'm like, well, why is that? A lot of times, I'll say to an athletic director, when's the last time you fired a volleyball coach because they didn't know enough about volleyball, right? It's usually not it. It's usually because they can't communicate, because they can't connect, they can't build relationships, they can't build teams, right? When they ask kids, what makes sport fun, right? Which is the number one answer of why kids participate in anything, fun. The 3 big buckets of things are a challenging environment. So this doesn't mean we let people slide by, right? But trying hard, a challenging environment, positive coaching, and positive team dynamics, right? And that doesn't matter if it's an individual sport or a team sport, that's the answers, right, in the research. That's what they want. Yeah.
I was just thinking of a name for this. It's the Ted Lasso effect.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't know anything about soccer,
Yeah.
football,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's what's so funny is how popular that show has become, and how so many of what I would call the world's best coaches coach that way now. There's a lot of Ted Lasso in Steve Kerr, right? He has an incredible understanding of human beings, right? There's a lot of that in, I think in Pete Carroll or, Sean McVay or something like that, right? I think that's it, right? And now what that show did was a massive, I think, disservice to any American guy trying to coach soccer in England. My best friend from high school was the assistant at Manchester United last year, and he was, they called him Ted Lasso, because he was a nice guy and he treated people well. Somehow that's a bad thing these days, right? And it's super sad. Now the players loved him and everything like that, but the media just, let's make fun of the American guy, right? So, but yeah, we have these conversations with top college coaches, and this summer, Cindy Timshall, all-time winningest women's lacrosse coach, 8 national championships. She just talked about Ted Lasso, right? That's it. She's just watch Ted Lasso and you know how to coach, right? And then when you add in this stuff, now you're really doing it, right? So she knows a heck of a lot about lacrosse, but she understands people. What are some of the words you put on this wall? Just we can shout out a few.
Integrity.
Integrity, huge.
Accountability.
Accountability, that's the massive one, right? As a coach, you gotta walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk, or you can't hold people to standards you're not willing to hold yourself. Be on time doesn't mean anything if you show up late all the time. Someone said something here.
It's like humor.
Humor, huge one, right? Make it fun. I think we always have to be careful. One of the things that I've tried to change about my coaching growing up in New York, I had a lot of, coaches, Eastern European coaches, and English and Irish coaches, and a big part of their coaching was sarcasm. And it never really bothered me that much, but it tore some people apart. And that's something that I coached like them because I thought that was it. And I've been noticed so much more of like when I make a sarcastic remark, it's often like, you know, everyone else feels better and that kid feels worse. And it's something I've tried. So we have to, I think, be careful about humor versus sarcasm. But I think humor is an amazing one for sure. What else? Caring, empowering, yep. When I started this, 11, 12 years ago, I used to bring these home and make my kids tally them up for me. And caring was the number one, more than double any other answer. It was just caring. They cared about me as a human being, right? Any other comments, thoughts on this, right? This is huge. Like I think I work a lot of times with grassroots coaches and a lot of people, it's their first year coaching, and I say to them, like, do you think you know enough about soccer or basketball? And they're like, ooh, no. Like raise your hand if you think you're unprepared for the season. And 60% of them, they're moms and dads who got voluntold to coach, and and they put their hand up, and then we do this, and I'm like, do you feel better now? Right? Because especially the younger the kids are, it's about understanding people, right? And doing that. Run a practice that you would want to be a part of. I think that's the key to coaching right there. Thoughts, comments, questions on this? So we teach like a couple of techniques to think about to coach this way. Number one, there's the research that I was telling you about before, right? In the research of that, those are the top 5 qualities of a coach. Respect and encouragement, positive role model, good communication, knowledge of the game, be a good listener. That's what kids say, we want that of our coach. That's what makes it fun from a coaching standpoint. So how do we do this? One of these we call the river effect. And so if you can make people feel relevant, right? I matter here, right? I have a role. The college teams I work with, I work with Rutgers University men's soccer. We just got done beating Penn State here about 20 minutes ago. One of the hardest things is, like, we have every kid on that team has come from a professional academy. They all thought they were going pro, whether they're international or American, right? And then they go, oh, well, I guess I won't go pro, I'll go to college. And then they get there and they realize that everyone else is in the same boat, and some of them are 3 years older than them. And so they go from I'm turning pro to I don't even get on the field in college. But we have to make them feel relevant, right? Because they need to perform in training, they have to get better. We teach them that everyone has influence, right? Your influence is never neutral. So how do you add value even if you don't play a minute? And what I found is in our teams that last year that team won the Big Ten. We didn't really have too many issues. This year we've kind of been up and down, lost, we're right around 500. There's a lot more kids sort of, well, why am I not playing or whatever. I work with Rutgers women's field hockey. Right now we're 14-0. We're the only undefeated team in the country. We still have a couple kids that don't understand their role right now. And we fight and fight's the wrong word, but constantly having conversations with them. How can you add value? Because their whole life they've thought, I'm only relevant if I play, right? And so that's a really interesting thing. How do we make them feel relevant? How do we make them feel important, right? As part of the group. How do we validate what they say, what they think, what they feel, right? Understanding that each of them is unique and individual. This is really interesting when we've talked to again, Steve Kerr about this. He talks about how, he goes, as the coach of Steph Curry, my role is really different. What does Steph need? Steph has all this demands on his time, right? Everyone wants his time, promote this, promote that. And he's like, I remember it was one year I wrote Steph a note and put it in his locker, and it just said, hey, make sure you take time to, have dinner with the kids and your wife and go play golf and just shut off from basketball for a while. And he's like, Steph came to practice the next day, and he's like, we were reading that at dinner last night. my wife and I had tears in our eyes because I needed permission. Here's like a multi-millionaire, one of the best athletes in the world, still needing permission from a coach to switch off. Steve's like, but what Steph needs from me is really different from the 14th guy on the bench, right? Who, this might be his last contract, right? What if I don't get another contract? What if I'm out, right? So that idea of validating people, making them feel important and all that is massive, right? And we have to realize that amongst our teams, everyone needs those little touch points, those individual touch points. I think skiing and the snow sports give you a lot of opportunities to do that. And my advice would be, don't just see them as like the touch points on just the athlete, but the human being as well, right? What does the person need from me in this moment? When they're down, when they're up, what do they get at home? Do they get a lot of hugs and maybe they need more discipline? If you get a lot of discipline, maybe they need a little more love and understanding. Right? That's coaching right there. Finish the acronym: empowered and respected. So if you make people feel relevant, important, validated, empowered, and respected, that's when they perform their best. And if you don't agree, just do the opposite. Right? Disrespect people, don't listen to what they say, make them feel useless and see how they do. Right? So we think about this, we talk about beta and rhythm. Did you have a question, Brian?
Yeah, can you throw a filter of how to work with youth when you throw talent in the mix here?
Define talent.
Well, yeah, good question.
Really good skier.
Yeah, you know, I have a group of X number of athletes. I want to do this with all of them, but even at an early age, we start to recognize this kid is talented by whatever we define that by, and they start getting all of this, and the other kids don't.
Oh, okay, I got you. That's a really good question. So I'll back up and say I think this is an important thing of what do we mean by, I think we label a lot of people talented, and what we mean is that we see ability, but I think ability and talent are not the same thing, right? I think ability is what we see, and talent is what we see combined with the right behaviors done over time. So teaching, so performance behaviors like resilience and grit and all that, and then some of the more, integrity, embracing the process, all that sort of stuff. So I would say talent is what we see plus those things. And I think the younger the kids are that we work with, the more, I think what we're doing is we're teaching right behaviors. Because we know the right behaviors done repeatedly over time is what leads to excellence, right? And, if genetics is the ceiling, right, then, we're trying to help them get as close to that ceiling as possible. So, what happens to a lot of kids is they get a lot of adulation because of early performance, right? And so then we say, well, what's driving early performance? Do they have twice as many hours on snow as some other kid does, right? Were they, born earlier in the calendar year than someone else does? I mean, whenever I work with, ski clubs, they always talk about that transition to under 16 when all of a sudden, right, that young kid, is in a much smaller pond than that at under 16. They go into sort of the world pond, and then, like all of a sudden, they're racing up in those races and they finish 30th and they think it's the greatest thing in the world, and then the next year they finish 29th and they think they're terrible, right? And so I think what we're trying to do is see everybody for these things, recognizing that in our programs, right, the amount of people who are going to get their name on this wall for being an Olympian it's less than 1%, right? It's a really small number. And I know that I'm not here and that all the other speakers you bring in aren't here because that's all you care about, right? Like, if that's the model, like go to China, right? We'll throw 100 eggs against the wall, and if one doesn't break, we're a success. But we're trying to develop people, and so I think we need to be pouring into everyone. And sometimes those kids who show early promise get so much poured into them for maybe just because they're a little bigger, faster, stronger, older, right, compared to whatever the calendar cutoff age is, that all of a sudden when everyone catches up athletically, they don't have the right behaviors. They don't have the right things, right? And so I think we have to be really, really cognizant of our top performers, that we don't let them, quote, get away with the wrong type of training attitude and coachability and all that, because we know in long term they're not going to make it without those things. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, absolutely, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else with thoughts on that? Because this is the art of coaching right here, right? How do I manage those children? How do I manage those precocious ones who are like really good, right? And then come from an environment where maybe they don't have the discipline or the training habits and that, right? It's right, the high impact, high character performer, those are the easy ones to coach, right? It's, and the low impact, low character, well, we don't really want them on our team, right? But the ones in the middle that sometimes are high impact, low character, like that's our job, is how do we bring them along?
Yeah, how many late bloomers never made it because they thought they sucked and gave up?
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of times I think our job as parents and coaches is to just keep kids in the game
Mm-hmm.
long enough to realize it's not an even playing field
Yeah.
until it is.
Yeah.
How many times have we seen late bloomers come out of nowhere later on in the game and really do well? It's almost like the big brother
Yeah.
syndrome, where kids are fighting to keep up with their big brother, or their teammates on the team that have gone through maturity faster, have bigger bodies and stronger bodies, and these kids are clawing to try and keep up, and then when they get even playing field, they're better than
Yeah,
it comes out of nowhere.
I mean, in sports like hockey and soccer, oftentimes the most talented people are often late bloomers, right? They don't come on the radar till later. There was actually just a really interesting collection of research published where they found that across a whole variety of sports, only 7% of junior high achievers are still there at the senior level. So at the Olympic level, at the professional level, 7% of the ones at 12 were going God's gift to insert sport. Only 7% are still there.
Isn't it pretty rare that a kid is successful from U8 or U10, 6, 7 years old, and is the top of their class or winning all the way up through the line?
It's far more rare than the kid who we never heard of till they're 16. Right? And that's the interesting thing, because that young achiever often gets the best coaching, the best resources, the best opportunities, and they still don't make it, right? And these ones who come and maybe had to fight later on, became a better athlete first, came late to a sport, and even in some of the sports that we're told a lot of times are like, oh, you got to do this really young to get good. Like one of my son's probably best friend in high school, his dad, like I knew the guy for 7 years, and then I found out he won Olympic gold medal in swimming. And I was like, what was your story? He's like, well, I started club swimming at 14. Was a late bloomer, but I actually really wanted to do it then. And then I went to college, and then I won a gold medal, and then I haven't been in a pool since. Right? But he poured all those hours in later on and won a gold medal, right? And then was done. So, when we pour a lot of hours into really young kids, and it's this difference between how do we balance, we were talking before, like a Mark Williams who's been here and spoke to you about practice deficits. You can't, in some sports, you can't catch up later on versus, versus what a Jean Coté would say was, these are not robots to be programmed into, they're human beings with motivation and inspiration and need all these psychosocial, emotional things. And we have to balance that and recognize that they're all individuals, right? So I don't coach snowboarding, I don't coach skiing, I coach a person. And that's the challenge, right? What does this person need versus what does that person need? That's coaching. And we screw it up a lot. Right? We work with kids, public, emotional, keep score, track who won and lost, and yet what we say or do can stick with them for the rest of their life. We don't get to pick and choose what that is.
And I'm guessing the coaches that people listed the attributes over here are the ones who didn't care about the talent or who was good. They coached every kid the same. That was my experience with a coach who would have that best coach who I would have had these attributes. They would have been coaching to the person and not to the skill.
I think so, and I also think that, again, not everyone's for everyone, right? Like, a coach in New York, a really well-known soccer coach, just passed away, and the tributes were flowing in from people. I hated the guy. I thought he was horrible. But in the moment where he crossed paths with me, he didn't give me what I needed in that moment. I was coming back, I had a tib-fib fracture, and I needed someone who understood and would be patient, and he treated me terribly, right? But then I had people who went and played for him in college, and they invited him to their weddings, right? I wouldn't let this guy bartend at my wedding, right? So yeah,
That's relatability, right?
that's relatability, 100%, right?
Your career or your teachers that you had, that were teachers that you really clicked with, coaches that you really clicked with, some that you wish, like I had a coach that was really hard early on, and then somebody that was easier later on. I wish it were reversed, because I need somebody to kind of gently bring me along in the beginning and then push me at the end.
Yeah.
You don't always get that luxury, right? You don't get to pick who your teachers and coaches are. So it's so much as relatability.
And I think this is why, like, I'll say to the parents tomorrow night, like, regardless of the experience with the coach or the teacher, what's good about this, right? There's always something you can learn. There's something good, right? Like, I get worried when schools, they survey kids after the school year and say, was your coach a good coach, right? Or was your teacher a good teacher? And I know that my most influential teachers in my life, I would have said, hell no, I hated that guy, right? But 10 years later, you appreciate that person, right? That was the person. And there's actually really interesting research around that oftentimes the teachers that get the highest ratings have the least effect on long-term performance. And the ones who a lot of people rate low in the moment have better performance later on, right? So I'm always like, I think we need to get input from athletes, like, how was your experience? But, are you really qualified to say, was this person a good coach? Not really. I see a lot of people like, hell no.
I got a joke.
Yeah.
So if we want more champions on the wall, we gotta be asshole coaches.
No.
No, I'm just kidding,
Yeah.
but you could extend what you just said to sort of imply that, right? Which is not what we're trying to say, I don't think.
What I would say is that great coaches are demanding without being demeaning, right? So a great coach is pushing and knowing, do more, right? I don't think anyone put whoever you thought about for that wall was like, oh, they were soft and easy and let me slide by, right? So it's demanding and do that, but in an environment of love and respect and not fear and intimidation, right? And it doesn't mean that we can't ever raise our voice. It doesn't mean we can't say, it's not good enough, do it again. It doesn't ever mean we can't say, take your bag and go home, because that's not good enough in the moment, right? But I think what we have to do is we have to put deposits in that relationship bank so that we can make those withdrawals later on.
I got one more.
Yeah.
I just took my 100 for Alpine coaching, and part of the test, the different styles of coach, right? There's the popular coach, there's the domineer, and it feeds right into what you're saying about personalities. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to bring those forward in your talk, and because this is a room,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, again, in the educational realm, it's like the best classroom environments are classrooms with high levels of warmth, they call it, and high levels of like discipline and demand, right? So no warmth, no demand, you're not going to get anything out of it, right? High warmth, low demand, you're soft, right? High demand, low warmth, you're scary.
Yeah.
High warmth, high demand, that's the most effective place to teach. So that's what we really want to be, Yeah. Another thing, just we've kind of hinted on this, and you call that sort of the rule of one. One person, one comment, one time. I said this before, right? Like, we have this ability to influence people. We don't get to pick and choose those moments. So people ask me, like, John, how come you've written books? And when I was in 11th grade, I went to a Catholic high school in Long Island, and I had a Franciscan brother for a teacher, Brother Jeff. And I remember 11th grade, I get a paperback, and it has a big red F on it. And I was like, Brother Jeff, like, I was a smart kid, I was just lazy. And I was like, there's no way this paper's an F, Brother Jeff. And I'm like, I know it's better than other people's. He's like, John, I didn't give you an F based on what they could write. I gave you an F based on what you could write. And this is crap. And then because it was the 80s, and he like took my books and he threw them out the third-story window in the snow. And he's like, get out and don't come back until you're willing to give me your best effort, because you're a great writer. And I went home and I was pissed. And I told my dad, and he's like, well, is it right? Was he right? I'm like, well, yeah. And so what are you complaining about? Right? So my parents backed that in the moment. And I dedicated 3 books to Brother Jeff, the guy who made me believe I was a good writer. Now, it was funny because he's left the Brotherhood. He's actually like the vice president of a community college on Long Island now. And he reached out to me a couple years ago, and he said, I saw you dedicated your books to me. And do you think he remembered that interaction? No. So 20 years from now, your most impactful interaction with most of your athletes that you probably won't remember, and it could have changed their life. And that's kind of scary, right? Because I think of like when I started started coaching, I told lots of kids, like, I was good for some kids, and others I was like, yeah, take up kayaking or whatever. So like, I think we just have to be careful, right? Just have to be, I've used the word a lot here, just be intentional. Right? Be intentional about what we say and what we do. Thoughts, questions, comments? I'll finish with this. I feel very blessed. Last summer I went to 3 weddings of former players, right? 3 weddings. And not one of them said, Coach, come to the most important event of my entire life. You taught me the 4-3-3.
Were any of them high-level kayakers?
Yeah.
No. No. All right.
One thing I would say,
Yeah.
going into tomorrow night is just your story of what you just said when someone was hard on you and you went home and told your dad and how he reacted.
Yeah.
Is maybe a good message.
I hear you. I think we Dave and I were having this discussion yesterday, and just like this idea of, my friend Jules in town, who's a middle school teacher here, and just the difference in teaching for 23 years now of when you have a kid who has a problem now, and you go home and you bring in the parents to the mix, oftentimes it's, well, what did you do to them, right? It's this protect our kids thing has become so pervasive that it's never your kid's fault, right? And so then they never experience disappointment and then get told the hard truth at home. And it's hard to give someone discipline if they don't get it at home. It's hard to give someone structure if they don't get it at home. So I do tell that to parents a lot. And it's easy to hear it, and it's hard to do, right? It's hard, it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's important. Right, I always tell parents, you gotta let them have the reps, right? Don't, just like the weight room, right? If you go to the weight room and someone takes the bar and does 8, 9, and 10 for you, you're not getting stronger, right? So we need to let them get their reps and struggle and suffer and, have a lot of failure before the success feels good, right? And certainly in the sport that we all teach, there's a lot of failure before success comes. And it's painful. So I came up, I had a list of some great ways to have conversations. This was one that got off the podcast. A woman named Becky Burley. It's the most important thing we can talk about today. That's how she started her meetings as a Division I college coach, national champion. And she's like, 60% of my meetings had nothing to do with soccer. Right? What's the most important thing we can talk about today? But then that's when you get into who's the person and what's going on in their world and stuff like that.
Is that in a team environment or individual? Or both?
Individual, one-on-one. But I think you could ask that to your team as well. I mean, there's a chapter in this teammate book that we did, we call Petting the Dragon. And with the teams that I work with, there's always an issue, and no one wants to address it. And I feel like that's what, like, most teams, you know, pay Jerry and I to come in and introduce the elephant in the room and get it out, right? And just deal with the tears and the frustration and the anger and all that, and then it's out in the open and it's gone, right? And it comes from this little kid's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon, where every time they don't acknowledge the dragon, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it takes over the entire house, right? And then once you acknowledge it, it becomes cute and little again. And so all my college teams have a stuffed dragon in the locker room as a constant reminder to pet the dragons while they're small and cute, right? Because they will get big and ugly, right? So, yeah. Just asking kids what they think, right? Approaching conversations with your athletes. What can I learn here, right? What can I learn from this? To just be a better listener. I'll skip that one here, but maybe, like, actually I think this would be really good for you all in your world. So instead of saying, I think you should have done this, or why didn't, you know, in my world, why didn't you play this pass, or why didn't you do this? I'm curious what you saw there. I'm curious what you felt in that turn. I'm curious what you felt in that moment, right? So you get their input before you give the coaching, right? Because if they feel it, they can do it, right? This is a really interesting one. There's a book written by a teacher called I Wish My Teacher Knew. And so I just took her main question out of there and put it into coaching. And so before the season, I'll have my kids fill out when they do goals and stuff. I say, finish this sentence. One thing I wish my coaches knew about me that would help them coach me better is ... And I say, don't tell me something that I can see, right? Tell me something I wouldn't know. And that's when they say, you know, it's really hard at home. My parents are getting divorced, right? My dad's got cancer. This is super stressful. I'm struggling with school. I'm really afraid of whatever, thinking of quitting my sport, right? And they give you this super fascinating insight into their world that helps you then connect with them and reach out to them and stuff like that, right? And then I think there's one more on there. Yeah. And this is how I end all my meetings. How can I be a better coach for you? How can I help you out? How can I be better for you? Right? And it's amazing because a lot of kids don't ever get asked that, right? And we still have the ultimate authority to decide, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that, right? But, right? What's the most important thing we talk about? And how can I be a better coach for you? Build that relationship. You know, builds that river.
I think one thing that's really important with this, I don't think it's ever too early to start this with kids.
Yeah.
It's never too late to start it, but it's always start this with the younger kids and start those conversations, because it's always amazing how mature an actual 8-year-old is when you give them the opportunity and actually, you know, give them the feeling of growth. Like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And what you're then doing is giving them autonomy, which is one of the critical ingredients for long-term participation, right? Autonomy, enjoyment, intrinsic motivation. That's how you get better.
And then think how that kid's gonna be when they're a parent later, because they'll probably be much easier to do.
Yeah. What's interesting, like when I do a lot of things too, like when I coach teams, I give them a lot of autonomy and say of how are we feeling, what we're doing, and at halftime, can you guys make the adjustments? Can you fix it? And then they move on to other coaches and they're like, you know, they're just told what to do instead of thinking what to do, right? And if they can become self-aware and self-reflective, they're going to be better, I think, at anything that they do, you know? Yeah?
I remember seeing this question from you a while back, and I remembered, like, the how can I be a better coach question. And I pulled it out of a PE teacher in elementary and threw it out to second through fifth graders, and I had more answers that just said, ask me this more often. Because I did at the end of the year, just kind of remembered it and just threw it out there as like an end of the year evaluation of myself.
Yeah.
And they told me to ask me this more often.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Different times. So it's cool
Yeah.
to just get that feedback.
And that ability to sort of adjust on the fly, right? And ask them, like, yeah, we can do that. I can give you that. And then, you know, when people get to weigh in, then they buy in, right? They weigh in on the values of your team, they're more likely to buy into the values of your team. So, yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a better way to demonstrate that you care and create a great environment than asking someone a question,
Right.
that they get input,
Right.
right? That you're automatically saying, I care what you think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and you're still in charge. Again, right, it doesn't mean they say, how can I be a better PE teacher, bring us ice cream every day? No, right, that's not one of the choices, right? But, you know, hey, this is a game we like, or this is a practice we like, or can we do more of this? And they're like, okay, how do we find that? How do we find that balance between freedom and discipline? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what time it is. Oh, boy. Let me just try to think, you know, I kind of, you know, I just think it's really important that we finish up here on understanding parents, right? And parents and coaches, right? Parents are the most influential people in their kids' lives. And the most incredible coaching session, whatever we do, can go out the window in the car ride home, or it can be reinforced, just like we were talking about before. And so I think this comes down to this idea of trust, and this is my favorite trust story. This guy was named the Great Blondin, and he was a French tightrope walker. He used to come to Niagara Falls and tightrope walk across the falls in the late 1800s. And he always used to, you know, be this great showman and do different things. One year he like went and fried an egg out on the tightrope and everything like that. And so he shows up this year with this cart, and there's 10,000 people watching. He's like, who thinks I can walk across the tightrope? And they're all cheering his names. And who thinks I can push the cart across? And they're all like, Blondin, Blondin. He says, who wants to get in? No one. Because trust is not just about your ability. I don't care if you're an Olympian. I don't care if you have performed at the highest level. I don't care if you're recognized as the best, you know, alpine racing coach in the country, Nordic coach in the country. It doesn't matter. Ability is only part of trust, right? And I think I didn't realize this as much until I had my own kids. And then you like the first time you think that you and your wife are gonna go out for dinner or something like that, and you want someone with like a PhD in child psychology who also went to medical school to watch your 6-month-old, right, for 2 hours, right? Because it's like, I don't trust you, who could you be, you know? And then, so what you realize is that trust is about this wall. This is trust, right? So it's about ability, it's about connection, it's about being believable, it's about being dependable, and it's also about admitting when you're wrong. Right? I screwed that up, I messed that one up, right? That's trust, that's trust. And it's so important that we build that. So my big message for parents tomorrow, no matter what. Oh yeah, so here's a little cool thing that I think can build trust, especially who's coaching like 12 and unders here? All right, a lot of you. So I got this idea last spring from a coach I had mentored years ago for my little kids academy, my 50 little kids. And so we did Apex Soccer Bingo. And so for the whole month of April, I said, if you can check off all 25 squares here, you know, I was in Spain and I like brought home some jerseys and some scarves and I'll raffle it off. And I thought like 5 kids would do it, like 27 out of 40 filled the whole thing, right? And I said, if you do 20 out of the 25, I'll give you ice cream. But what you'll notice is there's things like juggle a soccer ball 4 times a week for a month, do 20 push-ups and sit-ups a day, right? Write down 3 soccer goals and hang them on your wall, to make breakfast for your family. This is a good one. Learn to bake cookies. If you like cookies, you'll get a lot of cookies, right? Take a tech break, no screens for a day. That was a hard one. Where was that? Write a thank you note to a teacher. Help fold the laundry. Take out the garbage without being asked. So I did this thing, like about a week into it, the parents were like, can we do this every month? This is awesome, right? Because the idea is I want to develop better human beings, not just better soccer players. So yes, there's things on here that are going to make them better soccer players, but I will also want them to be better people. I just did one, we're in the middle of one now for October, because I was so tired of like the talking and the fooling around and everything. I just switched out one of the squares to, like, I don't believe in physical punishment, right? So if a kid's not listening or being disruptive, I don't say go run laps. Like I don't believe in that. I just make them go sit down and watch for a while. So one of the squares now is like, you're not asked to sit down. You're not removed from practice. You're not told to listen, right? The 2 weeks ago since we started it, the level of attention and focus at practice has gone from here to here, little kids. And they start going, shut up, right? So I think this is just kind of a cool way, especially with little kids, like how do we get better at skiing, and how do we get better as people? I think it would be pretty cool. I think you can easily fill those out with your own sort of stuff. All right? So I'll finish there and do questions. I just want to give you all my contact info. There's everything. That's my direct email, Instagram and Twitter or X or whatever it is now. I'm never on there, so please do what you want, but I'm not going to reply. I actually like LinkedIn. There's reasonable human beings on LinkedIn, so that's actually a good place to connect with me there. And then the podcast is Way Champions, same with the conference. And I do have some books up here. So my friend Jules Warnke and her husband Carl live here in town. She's been a Spanish teacher here for 20 years or something. I brought a bunch of books on this trip. If anyone knows Jules, many years ago their son William passed away and they have a scholarship for him. And so $20 a book and every penny's going to that. So my hope was enough that at the end of this trip, I'm going to give her a check for $1,000 for that scholarship fund, which goes to Steamboat Kids. So if you want books, coaching books, Champion Teammates, the new one, I'll sign them, sell them on eBay tomorrow for $21, make a profit. All right? Thank you guys. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell's well known for talking about the 10,000 hour rule.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
He retracted that.
There you go.
So there you go. Yeah, he retracted it. He said, so that was based on some research by a guy named Anders Ericsson on violinists. And it was never meant to be a rule. It was just sort of an observation. And so then when he wrote Outliers, he said, oh, the 10,000 hour rule, like all of a sudden it's this magic thing. So this isn't to say that practice doesn't matter, but a guy named David Epstein came in after and wrote a book called Range, which shows how genetics, not range, the sports gene, how genetics plays a role on a lot of things. So there's people who are elite performers with 2,000 hours, and there's people who are not elite with 20,000 hours, right? So practice is the biggest thing that we control, the biggest input that we control, but behaviors are huge, and the pesky thing called genetics is huge as well. So yeah, any people talking about 10,000 hours, it's not a thing. And even Malcolm Gladwell said he did retract it and say I overstated that. It's not a rule. It's not a thing. Yeah.
I have a question on behalf of our coaches, because I get this one a lot, is a lot of our parents have high expectations of our coaching, of our program for their kids. Based on their experience in sport 20, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of it's focused around short-term outcomes and short-term goals, and we're really trying to develop long-term goals towards excellence and also personal development. How do you recommend coaches respond to parents and work with parents on educating them around a holistic, long-term approach for their kid?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll talk tomorrow night to them about think about the sport that we're all coaching. You can do this till you're 80, right? Or maybe beyond, right? So if we stop thinking about, this as something that has to be accomplished by 14 or 16, and that this is just a tiny slice in 60, 70 years of skiing or snowboarding or whatever, would we approach it a little differently, right? So we put so much on childhood athletic performance, and I think it's just this huge mistake. Number two, I like this little quote someone told me recently. They said, mood equals reality minus expectations. So you want a negative mood, The reality's here, the expectations are here, that's a negative mood, right? And so, you know, you can either lower your expectations, right? Or you're gonna be in a bitter mood because reality is reality. Now you can practice and get better and change the reality, but that takes a lot of time, right? So you start with maybe lowering the expectations in this moment. The other thing that's really important to understand is the difference between boys and girls. What happens when boys hit puberty? They tend to do this, right? They get bigger, stronger, VO2 max, muscle, all that sort of stuff. What do girls do when they hit puberty? They usually plateau for anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. And then if they stick with it, they go again, right? And so because most of our research and most of our coaching has been with men, we look at boys and we go, you know, and then we look at a girl and go, she's done getting better, but she's not, right? So when girls transition from the kid's body to an adult body, it's a whole different ballgame for them, and they have to learn how to be athletic in that new body, right? And so there's a lot of research being done on that now, but we're very bad at coaching girls because we say, well, you're just like a boy, but you're not. Right, so I think that's one where we really have to, my daughter was getting so much better and now she's struggling. Well, you know, I can't say it on camera, she's got boobs now, you know? Like she's just different, right? Just be patient, right? So yeah. Good question, yeah?
Discussion around like, talking with parents about how you have observed their parenting, if you feel like, if you're confident it negatively affects their child's ability to either improve or perform. You know, when they're in the parents' mind, maybe they're the one like, I'm paying you to make my kid better, but you observe a behavior on their part that you know is having a negative impact on that.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think from the get-go, meeting with your groups and their parents, depending on the level, of course, right? And being like, this is a partnership, right? That we need to work together. Now, my part is, I have to see your kid, right? And what I mean by seeing him is, like, the more I notice, hey, Johnny's struggling a little bit, is everything all right at home? That little phone call, that little email, or, hey, I met with Johnny on the snow today, and this is the feedback I gave him, so if you can reinforce this would be really helpful. Now, as a parent, I'm going, okay, this is a coach who sees my kid and is trying to help, right? So this is a partnership. And when you form that good partnership, what I found is that when you screw up or something's not right, instead of them going crazy and calling your boss, they tend to come to you like, hey, I know how much you care about Johnny, but something's off right now. You know, what's going on, right? And so I think helping them and giving them the tools when you do this is not helpful. When you do this is helpful, right? So, I mean, I worked with a ski academy where, you know, eventually all the coaches lost their jobs because they were dealing with over-the-top parents who were, you know, at the bottom of every training run or race, the kids were in tears because the parents just ripping them apart. And these kids are like 12, right? And they try to push back on the parents, like, please don't do this. And then the parents ran for the board. And they all lost their jobs, right? And super sad, right? But it was an environment that it was impossible to coach in, right? And so I think, look, we're all in this together. You're gonna mess up, I'm gonna mess up, but I care about your kid. I wanna see him or her improve. And the more that we can work together on it, the better. I've coached a long time. I've seen many kids through this process. And the one thing I can tell you that's certain is that no one's on the same trajectory, right? Everyone's different. Everyone blooms and different. And there's so many pieces that go into elite performance. But most importantly, I want your kid to ski or snowboard or whatever for the rest of their life and look at this as something that they can't wait to do with their kids and whatever, right? And then if they happen to have the genetics and the motivation and the drive and the luck to not get hurt at the wrong time, then maybe they'll be really good too. That's what I say to people. And they try to get me fired. All right? Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. If you want to come on up, I can do Venmo or cash, or I guess I could take Bitcoin.
Yeah. you though.